for joining. My name's Molly. I'm the maker behind Lefty Knits. I'm a longtime knitter, occasional crocheter, and pattern design dabbler as of recently, and you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at lefty.knits. So this is my first video on the channel, so I want to share a bit about who I am and what I hope to do here. As I said, my name's Molly. I live in Berkeley, California with my boyfriend and my cat Lola, and by day I'm a graduate student in STEM. I learned to knit about 20 years ago from a family friend. So, as you may have guessed from the title, I'm left-handed, and the way that I learned how to knit was I sat across from my friend who knits right-handed, or the normal way, and I mirrored her movements. So that means that ultimately I learned how to knit mirrored or left-handed, where my stitches are moving from I'm moving across the row from left to right, and my stitches are moving from my right needle to my left as I sort of go in that direction. Neither of us, I don't think, considered me sort of learning to knit the normal way or right-handed, and I'm not sure why that is, but I didn't try. So I just ultimately continued to knit left-handed. There was a lot of trial and error involved in figuring out how to make sure my stitches, my decreases, increases, etc. are leaning the right way, and I'm wrapping the yarn the correct way around the needle for each stitch. But in the end, I got really good at knitting left-handed, and that's how I continued to knit, actually. I learned right-handed knitting at various points. I've thought about switching, especially, you know, as I was starting to make garments and do a lot of increasing and decreasing, where the directionality mattered. I got nervous, and I would sort of try to learn how to knit right-handed, and it always, I mean, I can do it. I learned, I know how, but I'm much more comfortable knitting left-handed. Doing something that, you know, I'm learning in the moment feels nowhere near as natural as something that I've been doing for over 20 years now. So that's why this channel is called Lefty Knits. I'm a left-handed knitter, and at the moment I have no plans to change, but we'll see. A little bit about my knitting journey, as you might say. I grew up here in California. I didn't need a lot of warm things. I mostly would, you know, knit a scarf or two here or there. I thought about knitting socks. I made a few hats. I went out to college in Boston and didn't really knit during college. I was busy, you know, doing college life, and after I graduated, though, I stayed in Boston for 4 more years. So in that time, I would get really into knitting every winter. So I would crank out hats, I would make big fluffy scarves and headbands and ear warmers and all sorts of items that I would be able to use in the winter, and then summer would roll around and it's very humid. At least it feels that way to me as a Californian who grew up in a very temperate climate that isn't very humid, and I just wanted nothing to do with knitting over the summer. At that point, I didn't really know that there were summer garments, but I ultimately didn't really want to touch wool or even cotton yarn. I wanted like no extra layers on my body during the summers in Boston. I moved back to the Bay Area 5 years ago, and I really wanted hobbies and things to do outside of grad school to keep me occupied. At the same time, my friends started having babies. So I started to slowly accumulate yarn. I have maybe a little bit too much now, but I started to sort of want to knit again. I wanted to learn how to knit garments again. I knit some baby sweaters and baby hats and started to care about gauge. I've been, you know, pretty seriously knitting and making garments for the past 4 or 5 years. And of course, it's been a great hobby to have during COVID and during quarantine. With this channel, I hope to just share the projects that I've been working on, tips and tricks that I've come across, especially for left-handed knitters, and perhaps if I do have any self-drafted patterns that people are interested in, perhaps creating some tutorials for those patterns. So now, without further ado, let me share my recent finished garment with you. Speaking of self-drafted items and pattern designing, my finished object recently has been this self-drafted sleeveless top. And I'll insert some footage here of me wearing this. It's made out of Juniper Moon Farm Findley yarn held double. So that's a lace weight yarn that is 50% merino and 50% silk. So I originally bought this yarn intending to knit the Cumulus Tee by Petite Knit. I bought the pattern and the yarn a few years ago at this point. I started knitting the Cumulus Tee a couple months ago, but my gauge was just kind of off. I had 24 or 25 stitches per inch, and the pattern calls for you to have 28 stitches over 4 inches. I just wasn't happy with the way it was knitting up. I'm not sure I picked the right size given my difference in gauge. And I also just wasn't sure that I had enough yarn. So each ball of the yarn has, I think, like 798, almost 800 yards in it. But holding it double meant that I only had 800 yards to work with. And there were projects on Ravelry that had used less than that, but I still just wasn't sure that I would be able to get the length in the body or the length in the sleeves that I wanted. So I just wasn't sure that it was going to look the way that I was hoping. When I decided the Cumulus Tee wasn't going to work, I started looking for sleeveless and short sleeves shirts that matched my gauge. Like I said, that was about 24 stitches over 4 inches in stockinette. And I just really wanted something that was simple and relatively work appropriate, which I know can mean a lot of different things, but for me, I work in a very casual environment. I can wear jeans, I can wear t-shirts, I've worn sweatpants and, you know, workout leggings, etc. It's really not very formal. It's a very casual environment, but I wanted to maybe be able to wear this in an environment that's like a step or two up from that, like a conference or a meeting where I wanted to look a little bit more professional, and I was hoping maybe this could be something I could wear with like a jacket, a blazer, a sweater over it, and it might do the trick in looking professional enough. Ultimately, I just wasn't finding something that was working with my gauge that I had, because I liked the fabric that I got with this gauge, and I just wasn't finding what I wanted. So I decided that I would draft my own garment. So I did a little bit of math to figure out how many stitches around I would want, what my row gauge was, and how long I should knit, and how to do the decreases so that I would be able to get the armholes and neck the way that I wanted. But I started with an I-cord tab cast on, so I made a really long I-cord and then I knit into it and joined in the round from there, and I knit up to where I wanted the neckline to start. Then I worked flat, and pretty shortly after that I split it into 3 pieces for the armhole. So I had the 2 front pieces and the back piece, and then I knit decreases along the neckline and along the sleeve sides to get the shape that I wanted, and I grafted the straps together at the end using Kitchener stitch. So ultimately I'm really happy with this. After I finished knitting it, I added I-cord edging, so I picked up stitches along the neckline and along the arms, and then I immediately did I-cord bind off. So yeah, it turned out really well. I'm really proud of this. You know, it doesn't roll too badly at the bottom. I was worried that with the Kitchener, or with the stockinette stitch, it would roll pretty badly, but this is, you know, an amount of rolling that I am okay with, especially because it's mostly just sort of rolling up along the I-cord edge. And I think that kind of makes it look a little more prominent and kind of cool. So this will serve its purpose very well. The one problem I have is that the armholes might be a tiny bit small. So when I first made the straps, I didn't do a great job with the length. I made them way too long. So I ripped back, and I feel like in general I end up making sleeves and armholes too long, if anything. You know, they when I block them, like they seem perfect, but then when I block them, they're too tight. So I think I might have overdone it in the other direction here and ripped back too many stitches in the sleeves, especially with the addition of the I-cord. It's just not like super stretchy. So I'm hoping that maybe if next time I wash this, block it a little bit and try to stretch it a little bit and make it a little longer, it'll work, because I don't really want to have to do surgery on this, but I have a lot of extra yarn, so if I ultimately have to do surgery on this, that's fine. I'll be able to make it work. So that's my one finished object. So I have a couple of whips. This first one, there's a lot of needles and yarn coming out of this. The first one is this. Oh gosh. So this is the Velen by Camille Descoteaux. I hope I'm saying that correctly. It's in Sweet Flax yarn, a Sweet Flax floor ply yarn by Ginger Twist Studio. So this is a case of the yarn I bought really informing the pattern that I chose. So I recently went on a trip to the United Kingdom. If there's a local yarn store available, I like to buy yarn on my trips. It's kind of, it serves as like a souvenir for me so that I don't have to buy trinkets, and then, you know, I can knit a garment with the yarn and think about the trip when I wear it and when I'm working with it. And it's just a really fun way, I think, to sort of honor my trip, to support local businesses and local yarn shops around the world. And, you know, I've really enjoyed doing this. So I went to Ginger Twist shop on a trip to the UK, Ginger Twist Studio, and it's a gorgeous store. It's super small, but there's yarn just like floor to ceiling, and the in-house hand-dyed yarn is super gorgeous. That's what this is. So this is the Sweet Flax 4-ply, as I said. The colorway is Good Morning Green, and this yarn is a mix of alpaca, linen, and silk, which felt like a really unique blend. So I looked at the website for Ginger Twist before I went, and I made sort of a light game plan of the yarns that I was interested in buying so that I didn't like overstuff my suitcase and I had some idea what was going to be there. And I'm the type of person that likes to plan in that way. I like to look at menus before I go places to eat. I like to sort of be prepared and to know what I'm looking for. Because I can just find myself otherwise browsing forever. And I knew, since in the Edinburgh portion of my trip, my boyfriend would be with me, I didn't want to make him sit in the yarn shop or outside the yarn shop, as the case ended up being, for a really long time. I kind of wanted to know what I was looking for. So I thought this blend was super unique, and I was really interested in it. And because the Bay Area is, you know, relatively warm, I felt like it would be a good pick for sort of a summery top. So I got 2 skeins of this Sweet Flax 4-ply, and I didn't have a specific pattern in mind, but I had an idea of the type of pattern that would work for me. So typically when I'm working with hand-dyed yarn, I like to not stay away from stockinette, but I like to have some texture because I think that it can help with, I like to have some texture because I feel like it can help with any sort of pooling that you see with the hand-dyed yarn. And I wouldn't say that I'm really seeing this here, but I think that the texture can kind of enhance the look of the hand-dyed yarn as long as it's pretty simple. So I'd had this pattern on my favorites in Ravelry, the Vellon, and it just seemed really perfect for this yarn. It's a short sleeved tee with sort of an all over broken rib-esque texture, and I think it's working out really well. So my gauge is a little bit tighter than the pattern. So the pattern gauge is 24 stitches over 4 inches in this rib pattern, and mine is about 28. So 1 more stitch per inch. So 24 over 4 versus 28 over 4. But I decided I liked the fabric. It actually, if anything, might be a little more see-through than I like, but we'll see how it blocks. And I'm knitting on a US 1 or 2.25 millimeter needles, which is a few sizes smaller than the recommended US 2.5, which is a 3 millimeter needle. So, and that's pretty typical for me. I'm a looser knitter, I think, than many. So I'm knitting the 3rd size, which would be 40-inch chest circumference if my gauge matched, which I don't think it does. So I have a 36-inch bust. That would be 4 inches of positive ease if I was matching gauge. And the pattern calls for 0 to 4 inches of positive ease. So if you do, like, if I was hitting gauge, this would have 4 inches of positive ease. But I typically like less ease, especially with something like this. So I'll probably, if my math is right, I have a tiny bit of negative ease. Like, this should be like 35-ish inches at this size, but I anticipate that it'll grow with blocking, and like I said, I'd prefer for it to be on the tighter side than the looser side. If my gauge matched, I probably would go down a size from the 40 inches because I prefer the look of something a little bit more fitted. I found this pattern a little more challenging than maybe any other top I've made. But it's been a fun challenge, and I love how it looks. You know, I don't want to give away all the secrets of the pattern, but there's a few stages to the increases. Like, you increase for the neckline, it's top down, obviously, and you increase for the neckline and for the armholes and sleeves sort of at different rates, at different sort of times throughout the yoke area. So it required some attention, especially because not only are you increasing at those different rates, you have to keep track of your of the stitch pattern that's going on here. So it definitely kept me on my toes while I was doing that part. I knit the top. I've, you know, joined the neckline at this point. It's got this V-neck here. And I've knit a few inches of the body, and after joining the body together and separating the sleeves, and I started working on one of the sleeves last night. So I'll be able to just finish the sleeves, and then I don't think I'll have an incredible amount of extra yarn. So I'm just hoping to maybe knit the sleeves now and then just knit until I run out of yarn or I'm happy with the length as is, whichever comes first. And I'm happy to have a slightly more cropped look than the pattern calls for if I don't have enough yarn. I think I'll have enough yarn to make it look, you know, like a top, to make it super wearable. And I'd just rather have it shorter rather than longer because, you know, again, I'm a relatively short person, and I think sort of slightly cropped tops look better on me than longer ones. Not to mention that I have, you know, much wider hips than I have a waist and wider than my bust. So tops just don't fit that well over my hips if they're like more fitted in the chest and waist, which is something that I tend to prefer. So because I've joined it in the round and I'm working in the round as opposed to flat now, it's been really smooth sailing. The sleeves are smooth sailing. I do have to do a peacoat bind off for this, so that'll be new to me and might be a little complicated, but by and large, this is going great. I'm really happy with it, and I'm hoping to finish it up here in the next couple weeks. So my next work in progress is this ribbed tube. So this is a Ripple camisole by Jessie May. I know you can't really tell right now, but that's what this long tube will be. I'm knitting it in Foxy Lady by Farmer's Daughters Fibers on US 1.5 or 2.5 millimeter needles. So I'm knitting the 4th size, which has a finished circumference of 28 inches, and that is the size indicated for 36 to 38 inch busts. And you know, I think that should work well for me. I'm on the lower end of that at a 36 inch bust. But I don't want this to be like super tight. I don't plan on having this be like a supportive top for my chest or anything, so it should be fine. Now, this is an episode where all of my yarn is coming from trips for these whips, but I got this yarn from the Farmer's Daughter Fiber store in Great Falls, Montana about a year ago. My boyfriend has some family ties to that area, so we visited last August, and it's a gorgeous store. This yarn is beautiful. It feels great. I, you know, would happily order from them again, and I'm hoping that maybe I'll be able to go back. Great Falls is also just a beautiful place. And it was on fire when I went, so maybe if it wasn't on fire the next time I go, you know, I'll be able to explore the area a little bit more in addition to buying more yarn, because it's just a beautiful place. So I cast this on to take on a trip with me. My main whip for a while has been the vellon, and I tend to keep a couple whips going, especially if one of my whips is more complicated. It involves sort of a different stitch pattern like the broken rib, or it involves a lot of increasing and decreasing. And I was going on a trip, so I knew that the vellon would be both a very large project to take on a trip with me. There's just, you know, more to it, more body, larger needles, multiple sets of needles at this point, because I have some in the sleeves and the body. And I just didn't want to have to deal with that, especially on this work trip. It didn't feel like great plain knitting or something that would work very well for me in that way. So I cast this on to bring with me, and I'd been saving this yarn. I had bought it without a project in mind, which I try not to do as much anymore, but I bought this without a project in mind, and broadly speaking, I thought maybe a Jessie May crop top of some kind would be a good project for it, but because that's one of the things that I think about when it comes to single skeins of fingering weight yarn, especially, is sort of a crop top or socks. But this is, you know, a single ply yarn that probably wouldn't hold up well as socks. So I figured this, it's just 3x3 rib, and it's from bottom up, so you just start and you knit a really long tube. And I figured that it would be a good plain knit, a good knit for, you know, having in public and knitting while I was chatting with people, and kind of distracted, because it's just, you know, this 3x3 rib tube. So at this point, this is mostly what I knit on my trip. I've knit a little bit on it since, but it's about ready to be split for the body. I think the recommendation is like 11 to like 12 or 13 inches of ribbing, and I should have enough, you know, to knit a little bit more if I want. The last one I made really cropped, and I had a lot of extra yarn at the end, so I'm, you know, knitting this one very full size, as long as I feel like I can. And then I'm going to be splitting very soon for the neckline. So this has a V-neck, both in the front and the back, although the back V-neck is a little bit shallower, like it doesn't come up as high on the back as the sort of V's on the front, for like the cups, I suppose, do. So it's kind of at a funny stage where this project is sort of entering the difficult part, and my vellin is leaving the difficult part, like especially once I do the sleeves, which are not super difficult for sleeves. There's not a lot of decreasing or anything, but this is going to be my hard project now, and my vellin is kind of my easy project. I want to finish this up really soon. I have some baby knits that I think I would like to have these 1.5 needles for, the US 1.5 needles, so hopefully pretty soon this will be off the needles, and some baby things, not for my baby, for another person's baby. I'll be able to put some things for some friends and their children on these needles shortly. So that's that. I have one acquisition, and it's also from a trip. So like I said, I was in San Diego for work last 2 weeks ago, and I was lucky enough to stop by Apricot Yarn and Supply. It was walking distance from where I was staying, in this really beautiful shopping center. There's a lot of green space, a lot of cool stores, and a good amount of, like, you know, there's restaurants. There was I think like a quilt exhibit. There's just a lot going on in that area, and it's super cool. I highly recommend you go by if you're in the area. So as I said, when I go on trips, I like to pick up yarn, preferably local yarn, that I'll be able to use and think about my trip while I'm using it, and when I wear my finished object. So I was good this trip. I only got one skein of yarn, and it's this white, blue, purple, variegated hand-painted yarn from Laser Sheep Yarns. The colorway is Sheep of Generosity, and I believe that this dyer is San Diego based, so happy about that. I've heard of them before, and I'm excited to try this yarn. I have it in a DK base, which is 100% superwash merino, and 231 yards for 100 grams. So I'm hoping that I'll be able to make something interesting out of it. Now, again, I bought this without a project in mind, but I'll probably go with some sort of crop top or something like that from Jessie May. Maybe if I'm feeling like doing something a little bit different, I'll make some socks, or if I have other yarns, I do have some other DK superwash yarn that might make so this might make a good contrasting color. Like I have some grays, and you know, I think when something's variegated like this with sort of light and dark colors, it can be hard to find a place to use this as a contrasting color where, you know, it does stand out sort of on its own. But I do think with some of that charcoal yarn, this might do the trick. So stay tuned to find out what I make with this. It's probably not going to be coming super soon because I have quite a large stash and quite a few plans and projects that I'll be sharing in the near future. But yeah, I think this is a great addition to my stash. I think it's a fun colorway, and like I said, I'm always happy to have local yarns from the places that I go on my trips. So time will tell what this turns into. So that's all that I have for you this time. Next time, I'm hoping some of these projects will be finished up, but we'll see. So tune in next time to see what I'm working on, how these things end up knitting up. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you saw here, please like and subscribe. That would help me out a lot, and I'll see you soon.